development of everybody listening right now. We've now got a senior, according to a hot source here, in fact, it's confirmed, senior law enforcement officials tell NBC News that the Boston Marathon bombers discussed coming to New York and for the purpose of detonating the balance of the explosives they had right there in Times Square. Chuck.
Well, the question, this is now coming during interrogation of him. I think some of this information, by the way, is coming after he's been read his Miranda rights. For what it's worth, we can set that aside. We know that that is the case sometimes. These guys keep talking. There has been some confused reporting on this. Initially, he said, they were just headed to New York to party. Now he says that they were discussing the idea of doing something.
Taking the bombs with them.
In Times Square. And remember, they did have all of these bombs with them. They were throwing bombs at the law enforcement during that shootout on Thursday. I
think that's the best argument, that they were up to more trouble. Let me go right down to Jonathan Deast, who broke this story for NBC. Jonathan, tell us how we know this, if you can.
Our best understanding, first of all, is that this was only aspirational and based on the debriefing that they're doing of the surviving terror suspect, Johar Tsarnaev, that he is claiming. First, he claimed, as Chuck Todd just said, that they wanted to come to New York to party, but under continuing interrogation, it now appears that he said they did discuss an aspiration about coming to New York to hit Times Square, perhaps set off the rest of the explosions. But again, there's nothing to indicate they ever did any sort of scouting. It was sort of on-the-fly conversation as described to us, and that there's nothing to indicate there was any specific threat to New York at that time, and that this is coming out of the debriefings, the questioning that investigators had done of that suspect. Yesterday, Police Commissioner Kelly was quite clear that there was no threat to New York, and that his understanding, his best information yesterday, was that it was sort of a social visit and that there was no talk about striking New York. Now, new information has come in here to New York that, yes, perhaps they did talk about the idea of coming to New York to strike at Times Square. Aspirational at best, at most.
David Gregory, thanks for being with us, because you have to study not just the news that you develop, but you also have to understand always the gravity of it. You know how New York resonates. The very notion of coming to New York to blow up anything is going to become a powder keg of a story now.
Well, it is, because it just speaks to the larger plots. I don't know if Jonathan's still with us. It's not clear to me whether this information came at what point during the questioning. That'll get sorted out. But look, this is part of what they initially wanted to ascertain, which is what were the larger goals. And as Pete Williams has been saying in his reporting from the very beginning, a key area for investigators is who else was involved to help them develop not just the planning, but the expertise to be able to pull off a larger scale bombing or a kind of plan of mayhem. I mean, what's quite clear is that they hadn't thought about the end game very clearly once those images were made public. And now this is new information about their whether there were delusions of grandeur or whether they had the actual ability to pull it off.
Jonathan, let's get back to you about mindset. It is obviously curious. Did they have any plan? We don't know if they had any sort of future forward-looking plan about how to get away with these bombings. It was almost like Bonnie and Clyde or something. We're just going to wreak mayhem out there, do a lot of this stuff, and somehow come to an end.
I think a lot of this information also comes from that wild car chase and shooting. You got to remember, they carjacked that one man, and a lot of this first generated because he was able to escape and call police. And during his debriefing, he says he thought he heard the suspects talking about Manhattan, about New York, but they were speaking in a foreign language, and then he kept hearing Manhattan, New York, and he relayed that to investigators, and that's what prompted them to do this conversation. One thing that needs to be clarified, as explained to me, this information was a result of the pre-Miranda debriefings. So I don't know what the disconnect or the delay is in terms of information coming down or information sharing, that at first the information here in New York was they were just coming here to party, and now there was concern that there was some sort of conversation where they may have contemplated wanting to come to New York. But again, it was all talk, no indication that there was any sort of planning or scouting of New York City done, although we do know the younger brother was here in New York at least once, perhaps twice in the last year, one for a Thanksgiving time visit and where he's pictured in Times Square, and another for some sort of a mock UN type seminar. So those are two trips that we believe we know of he took previously. But again, important to stress, no specific threat to New York. But as you were explaining, Chris, anytime New York comes up, look, we had the attempted car bombing in Times Square. This city has seen about 15 alleged plots targeting the city since 9/11. So anytime New York gets mentioned as a possible target, it's of great concern.